Hello, my name is Steve Planky, and I'm a cloud evangelist at Microsoft in the UK. I've got with me today Pete Satchwell. Pete?
Hi, yeah, I'm a solution architect for Office 365.
And what we're going to talk about today, this is Pete's area of expertise, is things like security accreditations for the various services that exist in the cloud. So, Pete, there are things like ISO 27001/IEC 2005, SAS 70, SSAE 16, and there are a few others. I think what would be interesting is let's just take those first three. Let's just think if we could cover those and what those things actually mean. Because when you look at the Windows Azure data centers or Office 365, not the Windows Azure service itself at the moment, these are numbers that you see. So let's take ISO 27001. So if you go to a cloud provider and they've got that logo, what does that actually mean?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So the ISO certifications is obviously an industry standard that has been developed over a number of years, designed around, let's have a look at a set of control frameworks and certain controls that organizations will put in place to see whether or not they are adequate in protection of customers' data.
Yeah.
And really the idea is that by creating this list of, I believe it's around about 16 different clauses or controls with a granular view of things that you should have in place, you can get commonality between looking at cloud service provider A versus service provider B versus service provider C.
Yeah.
And the idea being that you can end up having a certification process for this. So the ISO standard itself is independently owned. It's obviously an international standard. And what happens is that certain service providers will look to certain auditors to come through and say, will you come and audit me against a set of controls frameworks that I've put in place to protect customer data. And in Microsoft's case, we use an organisation called BSI, so British Standards Institute, who have been heavily involved in the ISO standard for a number of years, and are worldwide recognised as being one of the key auditors for this standard as well. And they will actually manage and maintain our certification for Microsoft. So they are responsible for the certification that we have.
Yeah.
They come in and audit us as an independent organisation, and if we were failing it, they could take that certification away from us. And it's all hosted on the BSI website rather than something that Microsoft manages or enforces or keeps.
Okay.
So it is an independent certification as an extent. Now, one of the things that is always difficult is looking at, okay, here is service provider A versus service provider B.
Yeah.
And the ISO standard does give you some flexibility in what is actually audited against. So you have something called a statement of applicability that goes with the ISO certification. As I said, there's about 16 top-level boundaries or clauses that are measured within the ISO standard, and certain ones of them may not be applicable for, say, Microsoft to manage. So Microsoft, for example, there will be certain controls that they'll put in which they non-disclosure agreement should be in place with the customer. That's part of the ISO standard.
Yeah.
Now, Microsoft will say, well, that's managed by our LCA organisation, therefore it's out of scope for the auditing, but it will be audited elsewhere because the NDA is part of our formal organisation that we have in place with all of our customers that we operate in as well. So that was just an example of things that may be taken out of scope of the actual audit.
So let me just get this straight. So you've got these roughly 16 whatever control frameworks, top level boundaries, and there's this thing called the statement of applicability, which is created by the customer, or like Microsoft or one of our competitors, for example. And they would say, I think that this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one apply to us. And the reason that one doesn't apply is because we've got audit processes elsewhere, like as you said, for non-disclosure agreements. We've got an entire legal department and legal and corporate affairs department that deals with all of that stuff.
So when you look at it from a service provider or a data center provider perspective, you go, well, which areas are actually being tested against this standard, rather than suddenly trying to boil the ocean and look at the whole of Microsoft LCA and look at how we operate in that environment. Because there are other control mechanisms in place that ensure that that's adequate and protections are in place. The ISO standard is really designed to look at all cloud providers, both small environments or any service provider, small one-man band guys, all the way up to multinationals like Microsoft. And that's why you see different levels of controls around it. So you need to look at the statement of applicability to say, let's do an assessment and see what's actually in the certification and go through that. So it is an audit that typically takes 3 years, so it runs over a 3-year, whereby there's a full audit every 3 years, and then on a yearly basis there's a continuous audit that will go through where certain controls will be tested and verified to say, are they still in place, are they adequate, are they designed well, are they working or operational? But it gives you that snapshot view that the controls are in place, the security policies are in place, and the frameworks and the management overhead around it are there and suitable for operating as a service as well.
Okay, so I've got that, understand that. And then there's this other thing which always seems to be associated with it, or two things which seem to be associated with it. One of them is called SAS 70, Type 1 and Type 2, and there's another thing which seems to be getting more traction now called SSAE 16. So how do those two things relate to it, and what's the story around that?
Okay, so the top level, SAS 70 was obviously a standard that was generated to look at service providers to say, do the controls that you have in place, are they adequate to meet public company regulations? And most of the standard was driven from things like Sarbanes-Oxley in the US, whereby they needed to go in and verify that if you are an outsourcer, you would still have the same controls as if you were operating it yourself. So the people looked at it and said, well, actually we'll use the SAS 70 as an audit control to go and verify against this. And there were two types of it, the SAS 70 Type 1 and the Type 2. Type 1 is really a view that says, do you have controls in place and are they adequately designed? And it gives you a real snapshot view going, yes, no.
So how does that differ from ISO 27001? These control frameworks?
There is overlap on there. There are certain controls that would be covered within the SAS 70 that wouldn't necessarily be covered in there. So some of it is financial liability and other areas around it as well. But the SAS 70 is really a view that says, here are the 12 controls that Microsoft's making the attestation for to say, this is what I have in place and it is adequate. Are they well designed? And that's what the Type 1 gives you. The Type 2 then says, okay, now prove to me that they are being operated. And that's where the difference really comes into it, because it gives you a snapshot over a period of about 6 months, which is the audit cycle that says, for this 6 months, the controls were adequately designed and they were also enforced. And that's where people are looking at to say, yes, I can see the ISO certification says what you have in place, your information security policy, the ISMS, which is another acronym, is in place, and what you're saying is there and good. But here is the operational aspect of it that says what you have there is operating effectively, or is there and in place.
Right.
And that's where people are looking at. So you should use both of those in conjunction to get a good view about it. So is the customer, are they ISO certified? Yes, that's a tick box. You can go to the website and see whether or not the certification is still valid. That's great, gives you a snapshot. And then look at the audit reports to say, okay, prove to me that you have these controls in place. The reason that people have gone down this idea of using the SAS 70 is really about things like overcoming the challenge of right to audit. So many customers will have regulatory obligations that say, I need to be able to go and audit my service providers to prove that the controls that they have in place are effective and adequate for protecting my data. And if you're looking at doing that as a classic outsourcer where it's a one-to-one mapping, it's fairly easy to do that. If you're suddenly looking at saying, I have 1 million customers on this system and each one of them has the right to audit, you really wouldn't get any work done. We'd be doing audits all year, which is why having a common standard that everyone can agree to, and you go, well, here is my audit report, is that adequate for you?
The cost of operating the service would be so high that it wouldn't really be cloud anymore.
No, it'd be your classic outsourcer, and there is really no way of overcoming that. So that's where that obligation came to, whereby the SAS 70 was adopted as an industry standard, and people have used it to do that approach. Now, what's happened over the course of the last 2 years and up until June the 15th, the SAS 70 was the de facto standard.
Yeah.
It was the only standard that we had. And what happened in June, I think it was June the 15th, is that now went end of life and people have moved over to the SSAE 16. So the SSAE 16 is a US interpretation of what's called the ISAE 3402, which is the international standard of accounting, which really tries to do the same things that what ISO has done. You know, let's get a common ground.
Yeah.
Let's then look at how we put in place. So the SSAE 16 is the US interpretation of that. They've also put some additional controls in place. There are some subtle differences between those two, but nothing major.
Yeah.
And really, it gives you an attestation that says, you know, the controls that you have in place are working and adequate for this environment as well. So moving forward, Microsoft will be moving to the SSAE 16 standard. It just so happens that we have to wait until our next audit cycle, because then they'll come in and audit us against the SSAE 16 rather than being audited against SAS 70. But there is quite good equivalency between those two standards.
Okay,
as well.
so what we're likely to see in the future then is more and more cloud operators having certificates for ISO 27001 and for SSAE 16.
Yeah, it's not quite a certificate for SSAE 16, it's an attestation.
An attestation, okay.
Which is, the reason for it is that, you know, there are 3 different layers of the SSAE 16. So there's something called SOC 1, SOC 2 and SOC 3.
Yeah.
What seems to be happening at the moment is most people are going for the SOC 1, Type 1 or Type 2 audit in the first round.
Yeah.
SOC 2 is slightly different in that what happens in SOC 1 is akin to what happens in SAS 70. Microsoft will provide an attestation to say, these are the controls that you should come and audit me against.
Yeah.
This is what I have in place.
Yeah.
The SOC 2 is, here is a defined set of controls that should be in place. I'm going to audit you against those. So you can see that
so those controls are defined by whoever SSAE 16
by the industry standards
is. Yeah. Okay.
So there's a difference there, between those two approaches, and really, it's you know, we're going to have to see how that develops over the course of the next couple of years. But most people and most service providers seem to be going down the SOC 1, Type 2 in the first wave, and then. You know, obviously over the course of the next few years, things could change and things can move forward.
Yeah, it's easy to see why it is that cloud operators might want to pick SOC 1, because if there was a defined list and there was something that the provider felt was important, but it wasn't on that list, then that would be difficult to do attestations against. Whereas if they can define it themselves and say, you know, that we attest that we do this extra thing, then that could be important to a customer. And you know, the cloud providers are going to know their customers better probably than some standards organisation.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's going to evolve, I would say.
I guess so.
As industry standards build up for it. I mean, Microsoft's approach is really to take a common control framework and apply it across all customers.
Yeah.
So what we actually do is we base our controls on the NIST 853, which is the federal standard about how you operate that environment.
Yeah.
Because what we want to do is have a common groundwork. You build the control frameworks once. We only have a single information security policy that we build and spend a lot of time trying to get built across multiple different teams and get enforced and get in place. And it means that you can get the economies of scale because you have one and you just try and make that the best you can possibly be.
Yeah.
And use those standards, and then it doesn't matter which customers come to our service. They could be small, medium business, 1, 2 million organizations, right the way up to multinationals. But the controls that are going to be there are still adequate for everyone across that environment. And that's really where the economies come into play when you look at mass access for cloud services.
Okay. Good. Okay. Thank you for that. So, if you found that absolutely riveting, you might want to look at the next video in which we'll talk about some of the other standards. What we really wanted to do with this first one was just to get those really core ones out of the way: ISO 27001, SAS 70 Type 1 and 2, and SSAE 16. So thanks, Pete, and maybe we'll see you again in the next video.